Okay, we'll call to order this meeting of February 22nd at 4 o'clock. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelet on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Notice of video recording. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. Are there any late items? No. Hearing none, could I have a motion to... we'll adopt the January 25th regular minutes. Are there any errors or omissions?
Move adoption.
I'll second that.
I have two errors. On page 6, at the very top, it should say it was moved and seconded, not seconded and moved. Minor, I know. And on page 10, I attended, the very top line, I attended the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board. The word library was just left out. So we have a motion to adopt, and we have a seconder. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Did we do approval of the agenda already?
Yeah, we need to approve the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
All in favor? And carried. Okay, public input and delegations. Public input. This is an opportunity for members of the public to provide input. If you are attending via Zoom, please use the raise your hand icon to speak, and if you are attending by telephone, hit *9. Are there any members of the audience who wish to speak? Yes. Could you go to the podium and state your name and address, please?
You may need to use the switch on the front of the microphone to turn it on, and you can remove your mask when you're at the podium.
And you can remove your mask if you like.
1477 Victoria Road.
And sorry, I missed your name.
Your proposal for changing the route.
I just missed your name, please.
Arvid Johnson.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
According to your plan, you're going to change the road for Fraser Lane. It's going to end up being closed off. And I'd like to know how you're proposing to have access through to Cedar and out to Peninsula again. From what I understand, there's going to be an appropriation of lands to go through from the end of Cedar over to Lyle, over to the boat basin.
Is this to do with the Village Green?
Yes.
Okay, I believe that's going to be thoroughly discussed in our report today.
Yeah, but I would like to know in your report when this change of roads is going to happen. Is this access going to be put in prior to any changes to the Village Green?
We would have to ask our planning department that question. So we'll get to that when we come to that section of the agenda.
Okay, that's just something that it's very important that it's taken care of prior to anything else happening.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Does anyone else in the audience wish to speak? Clerk, are there any members of the public that wish to speak by Zoom or telephone?
I don't have any hands raised on Zoom right now, but I have received a letter to community input. It is related to a topic that will be coming up later on the agenda, but as a public input, if you don't mind if I read it.
Certainly.
Record now, please. It says, Dear Ucluelet Mayor and Council, we are residents of Eagleview Manor townhouses. We are writing because we have learned there is a proposal to remove trees from the neighboring property in order to expand accommodation and facilities of the Francis Boutique Inn. As a resident of the corner block between Larch, Matterson, and Peninsula Drive, we are very aware how vitally important that particular stand of tall trees is for local wildlife. There is an eagle who spends a lot of time there. 2 days ago, there were 2 large ravens. In the past few months, we have counted 3 local jays, 4 variegated thrushes, a flicker, 3 hummingbirds, as well as numerous juncos and different wrens. We have seen many of these same birds in past winters. There are also 2 raccoons and a red squirrel. We ask you to protect this important stand of trees for the sake of the wildlife habitat it provides, and also for the beauty, shade, and privacy these trees create between our homes, the hotel, and the fire hall. Please do not permit the removal of this mini forest. If these important trees are felled, there is no doubt it will negatively impact many of us who live on the block in a small area that is currently pleasant, vibrant, and thriving with local life of all kinds. We do not want to be displaced or disrupted and have this very significant, diverse, small space to pushed back or aside for the sake of crowding more tourist accommodation into our small neighborhood of local residents. Sincerely, Julia Taff and Colin Zacharias, number 2, 1553 Larch Road. That is all the community input I have for now.
Thank you, Paula. Okay, delegations. We have 1 delegation this afternoon. Please keep your presentation to 10 minutes if possible. This time limit may be extended by council resolution. And members of council may ask questions at the end of each presentation, although council will not be making any decisions at this time. Today's delegation is from Barb Forrest, Ucluelet Concerned Citizens, regarding communicating with council.
I believe Mr. Dave McIntosh is going to present on Barb's behalf.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Mr. McIntosh.
Before I start, I don't hear too well, so I may need some help with translation if you have questions. This is more about process than it is about the actual issues involved with the Village Green project. So this group has provided a letter, and I'm their designated speaker. So thank you, Council, for the opportunity to speak to you. Ucluelet Concerned Citizens, pardon me, I'm short. Ucluelet Concerned Citizens is a diverse group of residents who have come together over questions about the Village Green project and the survey results. We are actively engaged with other residents and have an open letter circulating in town for signatures, addressing a range of the concerns arising from the proposals and changes that they would incur. Unfortunately, many of our members are unable to be here today due to previous travel and medical commitments. I'm speaking on behalf of the group as its designated presenter. Our goal as a group is to work constructively with the district staff and council. Citizens are willing to engage on their own time to make it better Ucluelet. We want to have input and be creative with what Ucluelet can become. Many people took the District of Ucluelet survey, and we want to know how the results will be addressed regarding parking, the playground, washrooms, and plantings. We are here today to ask for a public town hall meeting that will include interactive discussion. We have questions and want to exchange ideas. We want the opportunity to have input and to understand the design process during the next open house. We have ideas and proposals to put forward. When needed, we would like to have a counselor join us at our meetings for better communications, efficient collaboration, and transparency. When needed, we look forward to open and constructive involvement with district staff in our community. Some, but not all, of the Aquila Concerned Citizens Group have asked to have their names identified, particularly the members who could not be here today. Jean Ferris, Rena Vigneault, Pat Sieber, Carol Astrom, Jan Dresky, Barb Forrest, Bruce Forrest, Naomi First, and Monique Copeland. Thank you.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for Mr. McIntosh? Thank you for your words. The topic that you're referring to will be discussed later today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any unfinished business? Seeing none, we'll move into bylaws. 9.1 Single-Use Item Regulation Amendment Bylaw Number 1298, 2022.
Good afternoon. If you don't mind, I'll present from here.
Thank you.
Today I'd like to bring an amendment to our existing single-use regulatory bylaw before you for consideration. As a bit of background, the bylaw we currently have, which was adopted in 2020, regulates the use of checkout bags, foam serviceware containers, and plastic straws. In July of 2021, Ministerial Order M309 amended the Community Charter, giving municipalities the authority to regulate certain specific single-use items in relation to the protection of the natural environment. The order lists the items we already regulate, as well as plastic utensils. I've brought this report and amendment before you today to ask that you consider the addition of plastic utensils to our bylaw. The other changes you see in this amendment are simply ones that bring our bylaw into accordance with the new ministerial order. As described in my report, if this bylaw is adopted, there will be a 6-month transitional time period that will be used for campaigning and educating members of the public, along with the help of Surfrider Pacific Rim, prior to any enforcement of the new regulations. As shown on the Government of BC's Environmental Protection and Sustainability page, out of 12 municipalities in BC, the District of Ucluelet would be the second municipality to implement the regulation of all the single-use items listed in the ministerial order, if this bylaw is adopted. This not only sets a great example for other municipalities, it also adheres to our newly adopted OCP's objective of working with and supporting other agencies who share the community's goal of protecting our environment. Can I ask any questions? Or can I answer any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Mason. I have one. I believe Surfrider has been working with local restaurants on the coast to make sure they're aware of this, because a lot of restaurants, of course, would order caseloads of these things, and now we're asking them to not use them. So I think it's been probably close to a year since they've been dealing with the local restaurants. Is that, to your knowledge, correct?
Yes, I believe it was in October of 2021 that Surfrider Pacific Rim first brought the Cut the Cutlery campaign to council, and has been campaigning and making it very public. That said, we would have a 6-month time period in which we can inform and give lots of alternatives and supporting resources to restaurants that still are using it, as well as doing things like making sure that when someone is applying for a business license, whether they are opening a new business or maybe they're buying a business that's for sale and taking it over, that they're aware that this regulation comes into effect and the date that it would start, which gives them 6 months of time to use up any existing stocks and source out some more sustainable options as well.
Great, thank you.
It does appear as though Surfrider Pacific Rim has their hand raised as well.
I'll just see if council has any questions for now. Councillor Cole?
Through the acting mayor. Because I'm a competitive sort, you said that we would be the second. I want to know who the first is.
The first is the city of Port Moody.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Any other questions from councillors? Would Surfrider like to speak?
They do have their hand raised.
Okay,
That's
sure.
okay. Hello, Lori, are you on the line?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yes, Paul is correct in answering that we have been working on sustainability actually since we started in 2019 and have been really working with all the businesses, handing out, we got $400 to hand out the wooden cutlery, and we've actually even adopted it to work better after getting feedback from businesses. So out of all the campaigns we've done over the years, starting with the plastic bags and the straws and the foam. This one, we've actually seen the businesses really way more receptive to it, and it's just this like atmosphere of compliance that has developed, and so we're really happy to see that. So yeah, I just wanted to further add that as well.
Great, thank you for that information. I appreciate it.
And thank you guys.
We have a recommendation before us.
I will happily move it. That council approve option A to give the single-use item regulation amendment bylaw number 1298/2022 first, second, and third reading as presented.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion?
No, I was just going to make a smart comment that if you're not first, you're last, but in this case, second is good.
You'll accept silver? Is that what you're after here?
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. You're on a roll, Councillor Cole. All right, we're into reports. 10.1 Amphitrite House Project Update. Ms. Fortune.
Good afternoon, Council. I'd like to update you with information regarding the current status of the Amphitrite House project as it relates to the upcoming 5-year financial plan. And some showing you some pretty designs. As you're aware, efforts have been concentrated on the design and detailed solutions from the architect components and exterior landscaping to align with the district community's goals and objectives for programming, layout, form, function, and of course, factors of cost. From the design development documents, a Class B estimate is currently being carried out to be completed in early March 2022. For the purposes of the 5-year financial plan, which is why I'm here before you, we are currently recommending $1.9 million to be budgeted for this project. This reflects the estimate from the July 13th, 2021 report that looked at option B for the Amphitrite House project. And Paula, if you could go to the next slide as well, please. Do you have any questions?
Does Council have any questions? No, I think we're all well versed on this project and looking forward to it.
You are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. .2 Development Permit 1536 Peninsula Road. And Mr. Gregg is going to address this one.
And I'm just going to recuse myself as an immediate neighbor to this property.
Thank you.
Through the chair, just note it's telling me the host has disabled participant screen sharing. I'm just trying to share my screen here.
Sorry, Mr. Gregg, I may have kicked you out when I just shared my screen a moment ago. My apologies.
Oh, bear with us here.
You should see a prompt on your screen soon.
Is that looking more like it? Okay, so we will slideshow from the beginning. Okay. So Through the chair, this is a development permit for 1536 Peninsula Road, which is also known as the Francis Boutique Inn, which has been operating for some years as a 4-unit motel on Peninsula Road, right next to the fire hall, if people are familiar with the site. The application here is for a development permit. It's a form and character development permit. It's for a 2-story, 2-unit addition to the rear of the existing motel building. There, I've hovered my cursor over where the addition is at the rear there for those watching at home. The expansion, also in reconfiguration of the parking area out front, so you'll see that there are some new parking spaces that are being proposed towards the front of the property, landscaping to screen that parking area, and also the removal of the southern driveway access. In this sort of corner down here, there's an existing driveway which cuts the corner onto the municipal fire hall property, which is not ideal. So they are going to remove that and put screening along the property edge on their property. And I would just note that this is, and here we have an image of the maybe we don't have an image of it. Here we are. This is a rendering of the addition towards the rear of the existing courtyard. With a gravel courtyard, and the new addition is this building on sort of the left-hand side of the image here. So the notes here, because I was noting the correspondence earlier, the gravel courtyard is to be retained, and the existing trees outside of the building area are to be retained in the rear here. So they're proposing some tree removal in the footprint of the building and new hedge planted along the property boundary. I would note this is a form and character development permit area, not an environmental development permit area. So really the DP guidelines are around the massing, the scale, the materials of the building and such, and the addition in this place really isn't visible from the public road or the public areas. It's really the rear of the building. It's more the parking, and we're encouraged that they are proposing new landscaping. The public notification and input is not required. There are no variances. It appears to comply with the existing commercial zoning of the property. I would also just note, though, that the applicant, I'm not sure if they're in the audience or maybe on Zoom, but they should perhaps be given an opportunity to address council if there are any questions or if they wish to add to their application. Beyond that, I'll just see if there are any questions from council.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Any questions from council? Councillor Kemps.
Through the acting mayor to Mr. Gregg, is removing that driveway next to the fire hall, does that mean there's only one entrance in and out now?
The driveway entrance, yeah, currently there are two. One is sort of blocked off, I think some time ago when they realized it was encroaching. So it would be, their driveway entrance would be the single entrance, sort of where I'm hovering my cursor on the screen there.
Councillor Cole.
Through the acting mayor to Mr. Gregg, my favorite topic. I'm just wondering what floor area ratio applies to this lot and the kind of zoning that it has, and that it obviously is conforming to that.
It's the CS2 commercial zone. I'm not going to quote the floor area ratio off the top of my head. I'm familiar with our zoning bylaw, but I would want to look it up. But I can certainly get back to council on that. But we have, there has been a review of both the existing building and what the new additional floor area is, and it looks from their plans that they've submitted to date that it would comply with that FAR, and but that is also then reviewed in detail, and we have the detailed plans at the building permit stage as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Kemps.
Through the acting mayor to Bruce, where are we with staff housing on the property? Are we able to suggest that they have staff housing on the property, or where are we with that? Through
the mayor, I suppose we could suggest. It's not a requirement that this is not a rezoning for the applicant. Really, they're looking to do an addition of the additional rooms to the rear under the existing zoning. So again, this is a development permit, which is really around the form and character of what they're proposing in their plans. Staff housing is certainly an issue. Whether they have plans for including staff housing is maybe a question for the applicant if they are wishing to address council.
Paula is the applicant on Zoom, do you know?
From the names that I can see as attendees right now, I don't believe any of them are the applicant. And there are no hands raised at this time either.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Gregg. Do you know approximately how many trees they are wanting to remove in order to build that footprint of the second building?
I don't know how many trees there are within the footprint, no.
Do you know what percentage of the trees that are back there that they might be looking at removing?
It's of the area that's behind the existing building. It's approximately, just visually, it's approximately a quarter of the rear yard. They're proposing to build, staying within their setbacks, but there is some part of the area which is already kind of cleared. There's a bit of a courtyard back there. So of the remaining trees, I'd be making up a number. They haven't provided a tree survey showing the individual trees, and nor is that a specified requirement of this DP.
Right. Further comments, Councillor Cole?
Through the acting mayor, Mr. Gregg. It's true, though, that if they just wanted to cut down the trees and not build anything there, they're their trees in their yard and they could cut them down anyways.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this application does seem to comply with all the rules and regulations and the OCP. Any further comments from council? We have a recommendation before us.
I'll move recommendation that council approve issuance of development permit DP 21-06 for a 2 motel unit addition to the Francis Boutique Inn located at 1536 Peninsula Road, Lot B, VIP 59620, District Lot 282, Section 21, Clayoquot Land District. In parentheses.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll wait for, or somebody could get Councillor Hoare back in, please. All right, we're moving forward to 10.3, appointment of chief and deputy election officers. Ms. Mason.
Hello again. I'm bringing before you a report requesting that you consider the appointment of the chief and deputy election officers for the upcoming general election in October of 2022. Legislation requires that we appoint who the election officials are going to be. And in this case, I am recommending that Mr. Rotenberg, who is currently on leave, returning July 4th, would be appointed as the chief election officer, because when he comes back, he'll then be able to oversee the actual election in October. And prior to his return, I'd like to appoint myself, I'll say my name for the record, Paula Mason, and Samantha McCullough as the deputy chief election officers. And for the purpose that we can ensure that all the required legislative and logistic requirements are met prior to Mr. Rotenberg's return in July.
Thank you. Any questions from council?
That went by fast.
Try 8 years. I do have a question for you, Paula. Ms. Fortune has been in that role for several elections, and she's stepping back from it this time, I take it.
We did discuss it. Ms. Fortune is actually being a very good resource because she has so much experience as well. So in the interim, and actually going right through all the way into October, Ms. Fortune's experience will be greatly leaned on.
Excellent, thank you. We have a recommendation before us.
We're not complaining about sun around here, are we? I will move the recommendation that council approve option A to appoint Joseph Rotenberg as Chief Election Officer and Paula Mason and Samantha McLeod as Deputy Chief Election Officers for the purposes of conducting the 2022 Ucluelet Municipal General Election.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. $10.4 Water Treatment System Upgrades. Mr. McIntosh.
Through the acting mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This next report is about the water treatment upgrade. Specifically, it's about the cost of the upgrade and potential paths forward. The decisions today affect the water quality and finances for citizens of Ucluelet potentially for the next 30 years. It's a privilege to be here managing this project for you and presenting options to Council today. The water upgrade is essentially 3 elements. It's 2 facilities and 1 water reservoir. It's a treatment facility at the bottom of Bay Street, one small building. It's a treatment facility at the Lost Shoe Creek, another small facility, and it's also an additional water reservoir on the highway along Peninsula Road. These 3 elements would bring, once completed, would bring the water quality of Ucluelet up to the Canadian drinking water quality standard for, as I mentioned, the next 30 years and beyond. The upgrade in 2020 was estimated at $9.6 million. That figure was used to create a financing strategy. A grant was pursued and achieved. That grant was $7 million. And also the district was prepared to take on some debt to close the gap on the total project for $2.5 million. Since that time, the upgrade has been re-estimated. In December, district staff completed that re-estimation. And in December of 2021, the project was estimated at $20.7 million. District staff held meetings with the cost consultant, the engineering firm, and the grant funder to get a better understanding of the capital project market, the nuances and details of the estimate, the specifics of the project, and the opportunities with the grant funder for flexibility and options. So the cost consultant shared their experience with completing cost estimations in I'll say a post-COVID-19 era. They shared that the environment of completing cost estimates is very challenging right now to be accurate, and that costs are escalating very, very quickly. So high contingencies and also high cost escalation modifiers are part of that $20 million. The engineering firm, Associated Engineering, were engaged to discuss options in design and just specifically about what could be done if the district is at a ceiling in terms of financing and how the project could be whittled down to its really most optimum output. The grant funder was engaged to talk about, to ask and talk about what their flexibility was in terms of what can be done at this stage. And they've shared that the grant cannot be increased, nor can the scope of the project be decreased without defaulting the shared cost agreement. All 3 recommended that it would be advantageous to proceed through some design to then get a re-estimate of costs and a more empirical understanding of what the project is, what's needed, and then what real true costs are by receiving estimates from vendors. So district staff have taken a number of $15 million at this point and worked it into the current budget for this project. $15 million was a rationale. We believe it's a manageable number to work with. Of course, it's higher than the original $10 million of the project, and it's less than the $20 million that the cost consultant estimated. The rationale was that the cost consultant completed a Class D estimate, which is known to be 20-40% of accuracy. The rationale is also based on securing contracts quickly would contain some of those cost escalations. Preliminary design would also reduce some of those costs. Further value engineering and value analysis throughout the design work would also reduce some of those costs. And the last rationale for that $15 million figure is that the grant funders shared some openness and flexibility towards working with the district. If those preliminary design work and value engineering work was completed and the cost still remained high, the grant funders signaled that they'd be open to work with the district and provide some additional options. District staff today are providing council with 3 options, and I'll just summarize them and then go into some pros and cons of each option. So option A is to approve the project wholesale at a value that we'll determine and agree upon today, or council will decide and proceed. Option B is to partially approve the project and complete preliminary design with an understanding that I would return back to council with an updated estimate after preliminary design. Option C is to not approve the capital grant and focus on a rigorous maintenance routine of flushing and cleaning the system. Option A, to approve the project wholly, again at a value that we'll determine today, a project budget. The pros of that are that the project is fully funded, it's on schedule, it avoids district staff coming back to council during an election for decisions in the autumn. It satisfies the share cost agreement with the province of BC. It's the quickest, easiest way to bring the drinking water quality up to the standard of the Canadian Drinking Water Quality Guideline and Act. The cons of option A, of course, are that it's a larger loan and there's larger debt servicing. There's still uncertainty that the project would be in between $15 and $20 million. Option B, to partially approve that project. The pros and cons there. The pros are that it's partially approved and it's moving forward. Another pro is that a large loan is deferred until the autumn or until 2023 and beyond. Some of the cons with that option B are that the alternative approval process would be asked during the autumn election, and that would mean project delays and cost overruns in this capital project market with high escalations. It would also be off schedule with a shared cost agreement. Option C, to maintain the existing system without any large capital improvement. The pros are that there's no large capital investment. The cons are that there's no large capital investment. The grant would be forfeited and the poor water quality would carry on. Today, district staff are recommending option A, to agree on a project budget and wholly approve the project and move forward with the necessary steps. Those necessary steps are to complete a new loan authorization bylaw for in between $8 to $13 million, to complete pre-work necessary for the project, to initiate an alternative approval process of in between $8 and $13 million, and then to prepare a request for proposal for the design bid build of the whole project. So with that, I'm available to answer any questions.
Questions from council? Councillor Kemps?
Through the acting mayor to James. The grant funders, you said that they were open to working with the community. So does that mean they've given us like no time limit, or is there a time to be able to use those funds?
Through the acting mayor. The end date of the project is 2026. They are completely inflexible on the end date. There is flexibility around the starting date, the commencement date, which is July 2022. We're expected to start spending money by that date. They shared, although there is no flexibility in changing the value of the grant, nor the scope of the grant, once the district proves that the concept, the design is out of the concept stage, it's off of paper essentially, and it's more empirical, and that some value engineering processes have been completed to reduce the cost of the project. So once the district proves that it's gone through all of that, the province has signaled that they're open to sit at the table and discuss some options. They didn't share exactly what those options were, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a comment that I'm really glad that we're sitting here talking about water and there's an end to what we're having, what we're getting through. I'm sure everyone in this room could say the same thing. Thank you for the report.
Thank you, Councillor Cole.
So yeah, I don't think things are going to get cheaper. That rarely happens. I'm wondering, through the acting mayor to staff, what the timeline, so you said they might be flexible with the July start spending money time, but I'm wondering what the alternative approval process, the timeline that it would take to have that put in action and maybe being successful. What do we see that kind of window looking like?
Yeah, through the acting mayor. So I also, I have also Ms. Monteith here, our chief financial officer, to field some questions as well. But I'll give that a try, and if I fail, Donna will be here to support me. So as I understand it, we can start the alternative loan, alternative approval process right away for a fall intake. And at that point, it wouldn't require any council intervention or decision necessarily. The processes would be started, and we'd be on track for a fall AAP.
Sorry, and you said then the funds, it doesn't matter, we would have to apply for something to extend the start to be as of July.
Through the acting mayor, I also see CAO with his hand up here, so I'll just finish my response and pass it off to Mr. Lawrence. But the spending required through the shared cost agreement, July 2022, would be part of some of this design work. So if we were to start right away, we'd be achieving the requirement of our shared cost agreement.
Mr. Lawrence?
Just to provide a little bit of clarity with respect to the AAP process, so that's the alternative approval process that we go to the public for approval of the loan authorization. So the order of events would be we would issue a loan certificate, get approval from the municipal inspector. That would be through a bylaw. That would come through in mid-March to the end of March. Once that has been received, then we would issue and approve the number of dissent votes. So that's 10% of the elector would need to respond that they don't want to proceed with the project. That takes about 30 days. After that 30-day period, there's a 30 days quashing period. And then the report would come back to council for approval. So it's about an 80-day process to 90 days, so 3 months to move through the alternative approval process. It could be a little bit longer, and one of the reasons that we're recommending the first option here is that because of that timeline, as soon as we get into that August or September, we run into a position where council is no longer able to make significant decisions because of the election. So we'd have to move fairly quickly to move through that alternative approval process, at which time we're asking the public for their approval of the project by not disagreeing with moving forward.
Thank you for that thorough explanation, Mr. Lawrence. I did have one question as well. In recommendation A, it has sort of a dollar value with a blank, $1 million. And so rather than leave it blank, is it okay to suggest that range of 8 to 13, or should it just be an 8 or a 12?
Through the acting mayor. So what we're looking for today is for council to determine an exact figure for us to proceed with. And I can certainly provide the information and perspective that I've received from the cost consulting environment, as well as my own professional experience and what we think the figure
might be in terms of what a realistic outcome might look like based on the facts that we have in front of us.
Councillor Kemps?
And with your number in front of you, how would that affect the property owners themselves in regards to property taxes? Do we know that?
Through the acting mayor. So those figures would be determined leading up to the loan authorization bylaw, and any financial implications would be fully determined in terms of what's being increased prior to that bylaw coming before council.
And so back to my question, do you have a dollar value that you would like inserted into that blank?
Through the mayor. So $8 million brings us to a $15 million project, and $13 million brings us to a $20 million project. What I can share is that the cost consultant has estimated that this project will be $20.7 million.
But has reduced it to 15.
That's right. District staff have reduced that to $15 million just to provide a more manageable figure to work with. So what we're agreeing today is that if it's a $15 million project and we take an $8 million loan, we're not doing exactly what the cost consultant has advised us with their professional experience to do. We're following what district staff is suggesting might be a more manageable figure. And so there's an opportunity, there's a risk there that we proceed with a $15 million project, an $8 million loan, that we get through the project and district staff have to return to council asking for more money. Mm-hmm. On the other side, if we wholly approve a $20 million project and take a $13 million loan, we're doing exactly what the cost consultant has advised, and we're reducing the opportunity or the risk that district staff come back to council asking for more money.
So it's our choice, basically.
Yeah.
Councillor Cole?
I guess through the acting mayor, I would like to know from staff where we think we could save, or are we saying that if we go with the 15, that we're accepting the fact that you're going to have to come back again, where we could right now just solve it and say what the experts say it's going to cost and agree with that's why we paid the experts to come up with their analysis, and we aren't saving or doing ourselves any favors if we go part way and then have to go again. So if we're doing an alternative whatever process, then we should probably do it for what it's actually going to be worth, in my opinion.
Councillor Hoare?
I concur with Councillor Cole. It's having to come back, if we do the lower amount, having to come back and ask again just seems like it's going to delay things, and we already are looking at the increase in costs for everything. Mm-hmm. The longer things take, the higher those costs get, and so my gut says that higher.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Kemps?
I agree with everyone. I mean, this is water. Water and sewer are most important for infrastructure. We've been talking about water for forever. So I agree with going with the cost consultant. Ms. Monteith has a question too.
Ms. Monteith?
Thank you. Through the mayor. I just wanted to talk about the loan authorization bylaw. So the bylaw will say that we can borrow up to a certain amount. It has to be a specified amount, but it's up to that amount. So one of the advantages of going with something maybe higher than 8 is to get that security that we don't have to come back and do another AAP and, like you say, get half in and half out of the project, because that would be in a much worse situation. And we wouldn't be borrowing all of the money all at once, but we do need we do need that loan authorization bylaw to go to the minister for approval. So the report that comes to you in March will have some funding options of how we're going to pay for that. Because clearly, you know, $8 million, $13 million is going to create a yearly payment of $300,000 to $400,000 a year. So we need to figure out how we're going to pay for that. But we're not going to take all 20 if we don't need to. So I don't know if that helps you make this very important decision, but that's just a little more information.
I think that helps because we don't just get 13 million deposited into our bank account, and then if there's money left over, we get to keep it. It doesn't work like that.
That's correct.
Got it. All right.
So to be clear, before I make the recommendation, the number I'm using is 13 million, not 15 million.
Yes.
So I'll move the recommendation that council approve option A to authorize staff to complete an alternative approval process for a $13 million loan as part of the water treatment system project, and that council authorize staff to issue a request for proposal in 2022 for the design, bid, build of the water treatment system project upon a successful alternative approval process, and that council authorize staff to complete the pre-project work for the water treatment system project in the amount not to exceed $300,000 funded through the water reserves and the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Shared Cost Agreement.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Wow, big topic, that one.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Excellent report, by the way. Yeah. 10.5, interim policy for early referral of development applications to Ucluelethat government for comment. Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, and through the chair. So this is what's being presented in the report here is a proposed new interim policy for referring major development applications to the Ucluelethat government, and the aims of this are really threefold. First is improving communication with our neighbors. Also to take concrete steps to better consider Indigenous perspectives when making decisions on land use issues. And also, there's an element of streamlining the development application process in the proposed policy. This proposed new interim policy, and I refer to it as interim because the OCP does have a policy about developing a fairly fulsome set of communication protocols with Ucluelethat, and this is really a quick version of getting started on that, but it wouldn't preclude those discussions, and those can certainly take the time that they need. So the proposed new interim policy would apply to zoning amendment, OCP amendment, and subdivision applications of 2 acres or greater. So not small single lots or so many of the small rezonings that we see from time to time, but really on larger properties. And the thought, and this was in discussion with staff at Ucluelethat, is also around striking a balance of where there are likely to be concerns or values that are identified, and also wanting to keep the number of referrals to a manageable number. This wouldn't be hundreds of them; it would be perhaps a handful over the coming years. And so it really would be on those zoning amendment, OCP amendment, and subdivision applications over 2 acres where they intersect, where the properties intersect with areas of high archaeological and cultural potential that have already been identified on Map 3 of the OCP bylaw, or the official community plan bylaw. The process would allow and review by comment at by staff at the Ucluelethat government to proceed in parallel with the internal review that staff do, where a development application of this sort goes to engineering and the fire department and essentially all departments for internal review. In parallel, this would allow comment within a 30-day period to sort of see if there are any issues. So it wouldn't delay the processing of those development applications. And as noted in the report, if there are issues or values or comments that are raised or identified for a particular site, it's far better that they be identified earlier in the process. What's happened sometimes in the past is that they come up later in the process when notification of a public hearing goes forward. And so this interim policy would essentially allow us to sort of communicate and sync that input much earlier in the overall process. The draft interim policy is attached to the report, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions from council? No, seems like a no-brainer. We have a recommendation before us.
I move recommendation. I'll move that council approve option A to adopt the referrals, Ucluelet Government Interim Policy 13-6830-01 for early referral of development applications to the Ucluelet Government for review and comment, and that council invite discussion with the Ucluelet Government on developing communication and referral protocols for proposed developments and operations within the municipality.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed and carried.
Thank you.
10.6 Village Green Revitalization Project. Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'll give an overview of the staff report that is that's on your agenda. I'm seeking there's an interest in having some more information, so if council will bear with me, I'll give a bit of the background and provide some of the input and where the design has come from and where it's headed. So essentially in late November, council last received an update report when we presented the concept plans, which are on the screen. And as a result of that, we sought public feedback via both online and paper surveys through the month of December. And also, this is an excerpt from that last November report to council. I'll just recap the project goals that are for the Village Green revitalization is really to create a prominent pedestrian-oriented community space, prioritizing people and pedestrians over vehicles, connections to the ocean through views and universal access, improved connections to existing businesses, a safe and unique new playground for locals and visitors, space and amenities to support festivals, events, and the farmers market, diverse sitting, viewing, and eating places, and a welcoming and safe outdoor space where visitors can observe the activities of the local marine industries, such as fishing, vessel unloading. And these are elements that many of them are already present in the Village Green area. This is really about improving and expanding on the space within, which is a major green space within the community. And thoughts of improving the central civic green space really have been discussed for a good 20 years in Ucluelet, from what we can see. As you can see on the screen, in 2005, there was a community design charrette. In the 2011 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, it was identified as a priority project. And in this council's term, it's been made a strategic priority as a couple of the major public realm projects. And so work's been done to develop, initially it was a preliminary design that was developed and presented in 2019 to a public open house, really seeking feedback on the initial design work and confirming those project goals that I presented on the last slide. In 2020, that preliminary design, there were some discussions because at that point it was not a funded project and there was some uncertainty in the budget with COVID-19 and such, but there was an opportunity with COVID, did bring some grant opportunities. And so with council direction, we did apply for what's called a Tourism Dependent Communities Fund grant, and we were successful in obtaining that grant for this project. So that is the majority of the funding. I'll provide a slide that shows how the funding lays out in a moment. But that was received earlier in 2021. We got word that we received the grant, so we put out an RFP to engage a design and engineering firm to do the design work. They got started in the late summer, early fall, came up with a concept design, which was presented to council in November, and then rolled into, they developed the survey and collected all of the responses through December. So the timeline that's on the bottom of the slide there, sort of we are now here, is pointing to really finalizing the design, moving towards putting out to bid to a contractor and construction, which is earmarked to begin next fall. I would note that all of the community comments are provided in the council's package. There's 200 plus pages of survey responses. The top 5 that were identified, so the comments, the number 1 was the parking concerns. And I will come back to talk about parking in a moment. So the parking concerns were by far the number 1 identified concern. There was also second most common comment was support for the expanded playground. Not surprisingly, the playground that's currently there is well loved, but could use some more space, and it was sort of a top of mind issue for many people. Also retaining trees and rhododendrons in the civic green space, and then also a covered structure for music or events, and also more washrooms also came up fairly frequently. Both, as noted in the report, are great ideas, and there have been discussions around those. They're outside of the scope of the project as it has been conceived, but there may be other opportunities to move forward on those. And I would just notice, I'll give a little walkthrough of where the design is at. So we're now at what the design team referred to as the 70% detailed design. So this is where things are becoming a little more accurate and a little more detailed, where the engineers have, are laying in the turning radius and whatnot. And this is the cover sheet. But before I give a bit of a walkthrough, I should turn on my cursor here so people can see it. This is on the screen on this page is an air photo that shows essentially the existing area in the layout. And I would point out a couple of things. So down Main Street, one of the things just to observe as I walk through the design, because I will describe one of the proposed changes, is the width, as many or all of us are aware, the crosswalk in this intersection, it's a bit of a funky intersection where the streets arrive at odd angles, and it's a very wide crossing from the corner of What's the Park over towards the Aquarium. And the pavement width in here is quite wide, and it narrows towards the corner of Fraser Lane. And I would just point out this is the entrance to the existing entrance driveway into the parking lot that's at the municipal office building. So this is one of the drawings out of the drawing set that we've received. I'll try not to jump around with my cursor. I'll just describe as we do a bit of a walkthrough. If you were to imagine walking down towards the park, I should be careful not to jump slides here. Either where the cursor is sitting now is where, today the new Cedar Road parking lot has a boardwalk and pathway that comes out onto Main Street next to Blackberry Cove. That's where that cursor is sitting now. So if you were to come into the area from that direction, there would be a new crosswalk that would bring you in front of essentially where the walkway down to the front door of the municipal hall is. Or if you were coming down, essentially this is, if you were walking on Main Street, this is the existing sidewalk. Existing parallel parking spaces are shown in this drawing, and I will note some potential changes to that in a moment. But at this location, essentially there'd be a new pathway that would angle essentially towards the waterfront in Mount Ozard in the distance. So that's kind of structuring a little bit of the drawing, either people physically or drawing their eye into the view, really to the harbor from there. As you walk further down Main Street towards the corner, I just would note that at about this location, those existing trees I've highlighted in green on this slide. So those are the maples that are planted along the front. That one of them, so there's 4 of them shown there. There are 5 now. One would be removed. One is probably in the roughest shape of the 5. Essentially, it's where the new pathway would go through, and it would open up slightly the space that's in there, but 4 of the 5 trees would be retained in the current design. It's also worth noting that's right near where the curb is now, that the edge of the pavement is essentially on that line there, following the trees. So what's beyond that is it's shown as it's an expanded park space. It's a pretty substantial amount of space that would be new grassed park space for people. So as you continue, the pathway does lead to, that's quite an expanded pedestrian area where currently it's intersection and crosswalk. So essentially the idea of this is not new to towns. There's many traffic calming examples people will have seen in other places where making essentially shorter pedestrian crossings make them safer and more attractive and more convenient. Also at this point, the pathway, there's a new pathway, so the new edge, new curb along the edge of the park here would have a pedestrian walkway, so it's accessible, where currently there is no sidewalk on that side of the park. It's just grass and then curb, and then you're into the parking and street. So there would be a pathway that covers the entire edge of the park space to allow people to circulate in and through the space. At this point here, I would just note that, so that's essentially on the edge of what would be Fraser Lane. I'm reminding myself I meant to address this at the outset. Fraser Lane would remain open in this design. There's a comment earlier and a question about it. The plan is not to close Fraser Lane to traffic, but to keep it open. There'd still be 2 lanes, two-way traffic. This plan would remove parking on the near side, but does not close the road. Now this, I'll also at this point talk about the phasing of this, because this was seen as phase 1 of maybe a potential future, there'd be a potential future phase 2 design and project, but that's a separate project that is not designed and not funded, and that the concept of creating this as truly a waterfront park would require that phase 2. That would only follow if there were some changes to allow for circulation of vehicles, and there are a couple of options that have been discussed over the years, and I think the question about extending Cedar to Leach is one that I think since the 90s that's been in the official community plan and the transportation plans as a potential. The other is would be improvements to the Bay and Peninsula intersection to allow the vehicle traffic to circulate that way. But without that answer, there is no currently a plan. The plan is not to close the road. So Fraser Lane, so essentially this pathway leads to, if I can stay on the right page, the pathway through the center of the park, the design lends itself to, if it one day were to connect to the waterfront, it would be a larger green space and certainly angles in that direction, but really be a crosswalk across the current existing road to where the steps are down onto the promenade. And so the dashed line that sort of goes around the edge of the project shows new crosswalk in that location, but really there's no change to the road or the parking itself. If you continued on that new sidewalk around the edge of the park, you'd be getting, now there's this sort of large white space here. That's where currently the driveway goes into the municipal office parking lot. That would be removed, and all of this white space is where the new playground, the expanded playground would be. And so those 3 other sort of slightly smaller trees that are shown, those are to be retained. They're on the edge of the parking lot now, and they really provide a bit of a edge to the existing smaller playground, but they would be in the center of the expanded playground. And from working in the office building and observing how kids play in the park, they're as much play equipment as they are trees. So the intent is definitely to keep those there. But this walkway around the edge would, again, provide an accessible route that comes, it does connect through in this side, so around the parking lot, and into the park space on that edge, so there is circulation throughout. But from this point, there'd be a crosswalk, so that'd be crossing what is essentially the new relocated driveway into the parking for the building, and continues down towards Fraser and Helen. So this would be where right now there is no path, where I've just traced my cursor would be going, where there's better defined and improved parking there, planting, and a paved accessible pathway heading. Now I'll just go to the next slide, which jumps down. So where I just left off was up by this dashed match line here. So that pathway continues down. This is that, I believe it's a hazelnut tree that's right on the corner. And so this pathway would then connect to what is the pathway existing. It would be expanded to connect through the site. There is a bit of grading that's proposed to do. This area, generally, this triangle is where that temporary seating area was put in with a bit of a a bit of a COVID adaptation, where parking spaces were moved and picnic tables were put out on the old asphalt. It's now shown as it's pavers that would match the concrete pavers that would be used for the new pathway through the center of the park. Still to provide seating, but it's regraded to be slightly raised, so it's kind of hits the midway between this pathway that goes through. There's a bit of a grade difference to get up to Helen Road. It would be raised slightly, so you'd have like 3 steps and a seat wall, but it would be accessible really at this point. The grade would be flush, so people could come right through, and then there'd be a couple steps up to the corner in this location as well. The other thing, so that essentially would be allow a continuous pathway around the block where currently there's some major gaps. The other thing I would just point out is that what's shown on the design here is this is one of the places where currently there's a ditch along this section. This project includes, and they're budgeting for putting a culvert in that section to allow expansion and improvement to allow parallel parking along that side of the road. I mentioned parking, and it's a concern, and so that there has been some public comment, almost 200 pages of it on your agenda. I would note that there is not a plan, or the intent, and the plans do not show removing 40 parking spaces. Currently, the plans showed removing 12 parking spaces. This tally provided by the engineers came to a total of 14 net loss of the on-street parking spaces, but they also were showing 2 parking spaces removed up where I'm just trying to move my cursor, but it's jumping a bit, up on this portion where that's outside of the project and we're not touching the parking on that side. So those 2 spaces go back in, and so it's 12 that are shown is really the net loss of the on-street parking. We knew this was an issue, and before we even received the comment back from the public survey, we asked the design team to look at wherever it's reasonable, safe, and practical, can we increase the number of on-street parking spaces and lessen that loss of parking. The drawing I've got shown here is an amendment. This is since they issued the 70% set that we received the other day. So essentially it's in that area, which is on Main Street, essentially between the Municipal Hall and next to the Village Green Park space, there is width to do angled parking in that section as well. So that adds 3 more parking spaces. It also adds them, and I would say, in an excellent location because it is right next to the park where it'll be used by park users. And that includes an accessible space in the most northern of those spaces. So that, as it stands, it would be a net loss of 9 spaces. And that's not including, as council is aware, the recent construction of the Cedar parking lot added 28 parking spaces and has some space for expansion as well. So we're not including that in to get to the 9 loss. So it isn't a loss of spaces. Essentially, that's the number of spaces that are immediately in front of the Municipal Hall adjacent to the park. So I overviewed earlier a bit that sort of what got us to the timing here, this grant application which we received. The next steps, and I should mention the grant, that Tourism Dependent Communities Fund grant, has a deadline of construction of March of 2023. So just over a year from now is when it has to be finished, complete construction. So that's why the timeline is moving fairly rapidly with the steps that we've described previously with council. So the design development is underway. Essentially, there's a bid process and contract award we're aiming for this spring to get a contractor scheduled, committed to the project, and that the construction would commence in the fall, because we do not want construction during the summer months in this area. So it would be really October through March. Next March is when the construction is, at this point, aimed at. And certainly once we have the bids out and have a contract awarded, then much more detail on the construction schedule would be available with the contractor's input. The other thing I would note, there's the playground design, because that was one of the questions that came up. So that's a bit of a project within a project, I think is how I described it in the staff report. That is not part of the overall project budget, and it also isn't tied to the same timeline as the tourism dependent communities grant. We kept that bit separate. So it is in the municipal budget, but separate. We do have proposals from 3 playground designers that we're reviewing, that they would be working with the landscape architects to coordinate the design with some significant public input on that piece of the design, because it doesn't have the same constraints of the timeline. And there's a lot of interest from kids and parents to be involved in the design of that. And our Parks and Rec team, I'd say, as well. So in a nutshell, the design team is definitely rolling to get the work complete to get this out to bid this spring. And as I said, we have just over a year to get it built. And this, as I said, I mentioned the budget. It is a portion of gas tax, and $116,000 of gas tax was earmarked to this, $400,000 of the Resort Municipality Initiative funding, and the Tourism Dependent Community Fund grant was the bulk of the funding at $700,000. So it's not municipal taxes that are earmarked to pay for this. We have been able to line up those other sources of funding. At this point, I'll just see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Any questions from council? Councillor Kemps?
Through the acting mayor to Mr. Gregg. So regardless of the playground being on a separate plan timeline, are we able to get a firm timeline, though, before this goes out?
The firm timeline is we have to be done by March 2023. So the putting out the bid this spring will be a short turnaround to get a contractor, hopefully, to price it. And as you've been hearing, we've been hearing nothing but scary things about inflation and costs, project costs. And so getting that out to bid as soon as we can is the goal. And contractor availability and the timeline for construction, really the details of how many weeks they're looking at for all of the tasks and when they would mobilize will be one of the discussions. We did have a Zoom call. We invited the neighboring business and property owners and spoke to them in January and explained the same thing. As soon as we have that contract awarded, we'll have a much better sense of their construction timeline and would repeat that kind of communication.
And that's including the playground timeline as well, though?
The playground can float. It does. If it's not 100% complete by March 2023, that's not the end of the world with our larger grant. So it could, if it were being constructed in April or May of March of 2023, that would be okay. But really the intent is, because it's so, the landscape architects who are doing the design of the park will also have a hand in coordinating the whole thing, there's some real value to having the design rolling now in parallel.
Yeah, I understand that, but it would be nice to have a timeline for the park being completed as well, for the playground to be completed. So it's not just a sitting gravel pit.
Certainly, and that will also be dependent on confirming some of the funding for it. So again, grant and RMI funds for that, because we don't have all of the funding for that at this point, though we have some very good avenues to pursue.
Yes, Councillor.
I have another question. Regarding the parking, I'm having a really hard time with, regardless if it's 9 parking spots. So the spots by the municipal office, that new parking area for the municipal office, is that going to be just considered for community members? And will district staff be parking? And then also, where are the 9 parking spots that are being omitted?
So through the chair, 2 questions. One is the parking next to the playground and the municipal office today is signed that it is for the municipal office purpose from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, I believe. So outside of office hours, it's available for extra parking as well. But so there has been no discussion about changing that, to my mind, but that's something I think certainly we could discuss. So the net loss of 9 spaces. There are 9 parking spaces I have a pointer. I can actually, in this location where the pointer is sitting, currently there's sort of nose-in parking along the edge. Sorry, I'm on the plan that's on the left, the larger view on the left side of the screen. The red dot is in a location where right now there is parking on that side of Fraser Lane. There are 9 spaces, so that essentially the net loss would be the equivalent of those spaces, which is now what's shown as grass and picnic tables and market space.
And by the crow's nest, where are those ones now?
So there are currently, we'll go to, here we are. There are parking spaces immediately in front of the crow's nest here. They're shown to be removed for a larger sidewalk and narrowing of that crosswalk. I'll talk about those. So essentially, those would be lost. Additional parking is added elsewhere on the streets. We're adding parking on Helen. Those spaces, there's more that would shift down on Main Street. The nearest space would now be 12 or 13 steps from the front door of the crow's nest. Those spaces currently, those cars back into the intersection. And one of the things that's noted in the council report is that the Main Street is under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and these plans need to be approved for any changes that happen on Main Street. The backing of those parking spaces into the intersection is non-standard, I would say.
Further to that, if you're contemplating angled parking on the other side of the street, could those spots not be changed to angled parking in front of the crow's nest?
I'm not a traffic engineer, so we have to rely on the engineers who ultimately they're responsible for putting their professional stamp and taking the liability for this being safe. Essentially, parking generally has to be a certain distance away from the intersection, not right in the intersection. And so that is what's shown is using that as pedestrian space. The nearest parking space could be, essentially we've got the cursor hovering there, which is near the corner of the building.
Councillor Cole?
I'd just like to say we recognize this is a really passionate topic and there's lots of opinions in the room. If everybody could just keep it respectful. I can say that my grandmother backed into another car in the parking spot when that used to be, when the post office was there, when I was little and I was in the back seat and I remember it. So I do understand what Mr. Gregg is saying, that it's not ideal that we're backing into, there's a road that comes right up there. So I do understand that. But I also feel very strongly that, yes, we put in new parking, but that's because we needed new parking, not so that we can get rid of parking in the future. And I think it would behoove us if we came up with a way to not have any loss of parking in this area. And I can appreciate the future walkability and the, tourist viewpoints, but we have to remember that the people who live here, as we age and we're driving and we're not walking, and we do need to still access all of these services, and some of them are essential. So I feel very strongly that if we could find a way to not lose parking, Mr. Gregg, and I know that the Department of Transportation, I get.
Further comments or questions from council? Councillor Hoare?
Where your cursor is hovering, is that space, would that be like a loading zone? Because that's the other issue at the Crow's Nest, is how vehicles deliver to it. And as somebody whose boyfriend has done his fair share of loading and unloading, I'm kind of concerned about that.
Through the chair, loading's an interesting question in this area, which is an older area of town, and not every business has a loading zone. And most mornings you see the Cisco truck or others that are parked in the middle of the road and loading, and that's common to this area and other areas of town, and we expect will continue to be so. So some businesses do provide off-street loading. If there were new development, they'd be required to either provide off-street loading if they were of a certain size, or have ask for a variance for that and have a good plan for it. So I don't think solving loading issues for individual businesses on the public street is not part of the direction we were sort of given or pursuing with this design.
I'm trying to understand what exactly what is that spot? I've been trying to figure it out on the design, like the little hashed.
Currently, it's
plan for
painted
that?
that way. And then this 70% set, they showed retaining that. There isn't a driveway entrance there, although I believe the owner uses that as access to park a vehicle in that location. So to get to the other question, I mean, really, there's a loss of some parking can be offset with other parking. And so right now, the plans on street in the immediate sort of neighboring block would be a deficit of 9 spaces over what's there today. There certainly are opportunities for adding more parking with the Cedar parking lot, on Cedar Road, further down. They're outside the scope of this project, but certainly that's something that on sort of the bigger scale, the town, yes, is going to need to look at how are we making the most efficient use of all of our public boulevards and providing adequate parking where possible, again, with balanced with pedestrian safety and accessibility.
Councillor Cole?
Through the acting mayor, Mr. Gregg, is that hashed spot that Councillor Hoare was talking about, is that actually because nobody can park there because it is access to the property owner of the Crow's Nest and the property adjacent to it? Like, is that a drive, like a easement?
That's how it has been painted, along with those parking spaces in front of the building, which back into the intersection. There's paint there today that sort of blocks that off and effectively creates that situation where the vacant lot hasn't been developed as a parking lot, if you will. So I wouldn't say that's a regular like driveway access, but that's reflecting essentially on that side of Main Street. What's the existing condition with the existing angled parking, the paint that's there, and they've sort of taken the design from there north. I believe, I'm going to skip to this design. Also, so this plan was in response to where we asked the engineers to see, can you get more parking on Main Street? So I focused on what was on the right-hand side of Main Street in this view, which is next to the park, which would add angled parking. They're also showing that it's possible to add a couple more spaces closer to the front door of the Crow's Nest, but it's really where that hatching or existing paint is currently.
And the hatching is done by the people who are the boss of the road, which isn't us.
I don't know the history of how those parking spaces got striped, whether it was municipal crews, Ministry of Transportation. They've been there for some time. That's what's existing.
And then I guess my one more follow-up question is that where we now show parallel parking going down on where it currently is, I guess it does get too narrow there to continue with angle parking?
Main Street is a bit of a wedge because this is partly to suit our budget, because I should say that the budget is in our approach to this has been, estimated by the engineers. We have a Class B cost estimate now. They're designing to the budget, but it's always a question mark on what are the bids going to come in as. So we've been very cognizant of that there are areas of this where if the prices come in over, we may have to peel back how much of it we can build and focus on the core, which would be, I would say, would be the park, the playground, the walkway, which doesn't exist along Fraser Lane to get to the corner of Helen Street, to put in that pedestrian pathway and sort of go from there. So the design of this, I'm getting around to the answer of the Main Street, the design, we've really been working from curb to curb, what's existing there now. Because concrete's expensive, so this isn't showing, break up and replace those sidewalks. It's sort of working within that. So the two things is Main Street is a little narrower further up the hill to like in front of the liquor store and the bank and that stretch. The engineers are indicating there really just isn't quite enough width there. The other thing is it's steeper there. And so the nose in on angled parking, to back out of that, you're gunning it uphill backwards a little bit. So they had a little bit of safety concern about that. Whereas the grade eases as you get further down the hill in front of the park. And there it also is wide enough that they can just do that safely.
Sorry, one more little bit. So while we are, obviously this is a big deal, I'm wondering if with the people who make the decisions about what happens with this road down to the end of the dock there, right down to the whiskey dock, I'm wondering if was any conversations or whether it became a topic of this maybe solving some of what happens at the top of the hill with making the flow of traffic a one-way situation or anything that extreme that would solve another problem and thus then free up more width for more parking.
We've had discussions with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure about this. There's been various design iterations, some of which council have seen. In 2019, we had, I think, 4 different options of the Main Street intersection as part of the design work that we had some engineers working on. They did look at the one-way. I know one-way has been talked about for some years. The one-way creates a bit of a ripple effect of where does traffic then go if it's not coming up Main Street, and that overall study hasn't been done. So to answer the question, there's sort of 2 things. One is that the solving that intersection or changing it is outside the scope and the budget of this project, which is really focused on the village green and the sort of pedestrian realm around it. And that there are alternatives certainly for Peninsula and Maine to make that safe and convenient. And I think the actually preferred option that came out of those discussions, though it would be, again, something that the province would have to be on board funding, was we could keep it as a 2-way, but would necessitate some regrading of the intersection. So it was a fairly major project. So outside the scope of this.
Councillor Kemps?
One more question. Thank you, Mr. Craig. Has there been talk, because of the higher cost of doing business and projects nowadays, has there been any conversation be had of doing this and maybe looking at, for now, before we get more parking, to keep some of that parking by the corner of Cedar and Main until we get more parking up along on the other part of Fraser and Helen area?
That may be an option. How we've been proceeding is with the design team to design it all so that it would be what is the permanent fix, if you will, what is safe, what is ideal. And then when we get the bids, if we need to, or as we get closer to it and get more refined cost estimates, if we need to scale some of it out of the project, we would do it at that point. But if we can have it designed and engineered, then it's shovel ready for if we have funding at some point down the road as well. So we're trying to take advantage of the design team to get as much shovel-ready work as we can, acknowledging that if it's out of our budget, then there'll be some pieces, particularly like on the edges of the project, maybe ones that we don't build at this point. We would be bringing that to council, certainly to authorize when that bidding has been completed and we have the contract to actually do the constructed works. As an illustration of that, I would just point out one of the pieces they didn't really highlight. One of the things that I think is likely to suffer in the budget, that really on the other side of Fraser Lane, one piece that is we've asked for them to do some focus on the design work, is to add an accessible ramp to the front door of the aquarium. So that would be reworking what's an Allen block wall along the edge there and replacing it with a sort of a retaining wall and ramp in the place there. That's an expensive maneuver, and if there ever were a second phase that is pursued in the future, it could be done as part of that. There may be an interim solution to improve accessibility as well that we have some ideas on, but likely that is not going to be within the budget of this project.
Councillor Kemps?
Speaking of that kind of thing, looking down the road, while we build out this, when this goes through, are there some going to be set up for electric charging stations? And then when we get grant money, we'll put in electric charging stations?
Initially they explored doing some electric charging stations as part of this project. We had some discussions, and electric vehicle charging stations on street is a bit problematic. It's was decided to focus on our parking lots. So we do have some grant monies available for the vehicle charging, and so like in the Cedar Road parking lot, just opposite, out of view to the left of these drawings, there's charging there, and there's intention of potentially expanding that as well, and other locations on district lands. But on street, if someone tends to gravitate towards them and may park for longer, that may actually occupy a space which, in front of an area like this where there are many businesses, it's more ideal to have it flexible and allow for turnover.
So if I could make a comment, I can get my head around most of the changes to do with the parking, but I just cannot get my head around removing the ones in front of the Crow's Nest. It's just, I know they're backing into traffic, and that's a bad thing, but there's other parts of town that does that too. And I don't get the rationale other than the fact that they shouldn't be backing into traffic. Is there a way for the consultants to rejig that?
I think the question may be one of removing it from the scope of this project. I doubt the engineers would put their stamp on a drawing that would leave the parking backing into the intersection. It's a really good discussion in Ucluelet, because as we roll around to some of the design work this council has made a priority for Peninsula Road, there are a number of locations as well where there is parking that backs into the highway, and we anticipate that Jiggers, Howlers, in front of the West Coast Connect, there's a few locations like that where shifting to parallel parking, I think, is very likely to be part of the plans that MOTI approves. And essentially, if the ministry focused on this and decided tomorrow that it was not safe, they could close it off.
And what about an option to parallel park instead of pull straight in? That would reduce probably the number of cars that could park there, but at least it wouldn't remove them altogether.
We certainly can ask our engineers to look at that. There is distance from the intersection that needs to be maintained. You can't block views of the intersection, and there is a limit to how close a car can be parked without being in the intersection and it being a safety concern. So it is a funny angle, that intersection. It's not a 90-degree, so it's one that they have looked at, and to allow for the turning radius for if somebody rolls into town in a rental RV and needs to make the corner, they need to make sure that it's possible and safe.
Any further comments?
About the
Councillor
Crow's
Kent?
Nest parking, can we just say we're not doing that part and then take it right out of the mix so the engineer doesn't have to put a stamp on it?
We could. I just do caution that the plans do need to be approved by the ministry before we do any construction. Now, it may be that that's something that we leave for another day and another phase, and potentially.
Or maybe just put a sticker over that section when you're handing in the plans so they don't notice. Further comments? Not right at this point, but yes, afterwards. So I think we're all in agreement that we would like to either remove that from the plan, or explore parallel parking with the consultants or the engineers. Am I right?
I know that there's a time frame that Mr. Gregg has spoke to, and that we need to be moving forward with this. I'm wondering if we would want to talk about it at the next meeting when there's 5 of us sitting here. Not that might make a difference to any decisions we make right now, but I'm just saying it out loud. It's not that I think that we're not capable of. Yeah. You're probably right.
Yeah, no decision has to be made as part of this
Yeah.
report tonight, so it's for discussion. And
But we would be asking for more effort or yet a go back to the people who made the plans and like there's more work to, well, we'd be asking for more work to be done, I guess. Yeah.
would you like a motion to that effect, Mr. Gregg?
Council is absolutely free to ask for whatever council wishes. Given the timeline we have, I would, our design team is rolling, and if we're going to get this thing out to bid, I absolutely will share every word of the feedback that you've provided here. There's really is not on a timeline to seek design changes and further, input, and there is no budget or space in the timeline for further sort of public input on the design. It's certainly what I'm hearing is that's a priority area for consideration of lessening the budget, that is not a priority to construct at this time, if that's fair to say. I'm seeing nodding of heads with council, that I would hesitate to ask the consultants to revisit the design. I think it would throw our timeline off, and there's some risk associated, and council should be aware of that.
I think the whole rest of the design is fine. It's just that one little piece.
So then, Mr. Gregg, is it possible to just say we like all of this other stuff, but let's just leave this for now for another phase or another whatever?
If that's council's wish, we can certainly share that with our design team and pursue it that way.
Do you need a motion?
It's always best to have a motion, so to make sure we get it right.
Who would like to make that motion?
I may, if council wishes, if we can take a moment and we can draft a resolution that captures, just for clarity's sake. So what we're hearing right now is that council is going to be asking staff to defer the implementation of the corner in front of the Crow's Nest path, or Crow's Nest building, for a future project consideration, or to investigate reduced loss of parking in front of the building. Is that
By parallel parking.
by parallel parking? If you can give us a moment, we could draft up a resolution for council's consideration.
I don't think it should say about the parallel parking, because I think it's going to be the same problem regardless, because if you were doing that, you're still going to be backing in and out of and actually spending more time in that danger zone than...
Mr. Gregg, can you stop sharing your screen for a moment?
It might be angled parking as opposed to, but just, yeah, some method to decrease that loss.
Can I suggest a recess just while we do this in a bio break?
I'll second that.
5 minutes? All in favor? Yes. There is a question bringing the meeting back to order. Okay, we have a draft resolution before us. If that works for council, would someone like to move that?
That's, I'm just clarifying, that's deferring the implementation of the pedestrian improvements in front of the Crow's Nest, correct? Just in front of the Crow's Nest, right?
That would be correct.
Okay. All right, I got this. I will move that council direct staff to work with Village Green consultants to reduce loss of parking in front of the Crow's Nest building, or to defer implementation of pedestrian improvements to a future project in that space.
Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we have some progress. Now, do you have more to present to us on this topic, Mr. Gregg?
No?
No. So, would it be okay if you took a few questions from the audience? Because they probably would not want to wait till the end of our meeting. It's fresh on their minds right now.
Certainly will. As I said, I'm not the traffic engineer or the landscape architect behind this design, but we can certainly answer any questions to the best I can through council.
Okay, great. You may not have all the answers, but we up here certainly don't. So if anybody would like to speak, please raise your hand and go to the podium, and you state your name and address, and you can remove your mask while you're standing there.
Thank you. Jan Dresky, the Crow's Nest is at 205 Main Street. Obviously, I'm here representing the Crow's Nest, and thank you for all your support and consideration of the unique challenges to where my store is and the historic parking that was created there and may or may not comply now. As far as the cross-hatching goes, I've lived here for 50 years, and that cross-hatching has always been there. And back in the day, it was the post office employee parking. That's where they parked. They only needed 2 spots, so it didn't progress in any further. And that lot, my building is 9 feet onto that lot, so it's kind of a unique situation. It covers 1 lot and then 9 feet of the next lot. So my concerns are, which I think you're addressing, and thank you so much for paying attention to the surveys and people's concerns. I really appreciate it. Is that the crosswalk that we have is actually, in my opinion, safer than putting a crosswalk out on the edge next to that stop sign on Cedar Street, which is the problematic odd angle of the road coming in. So I think having, in my opinion, the crosswalk where it currently is a little bit safer than putting it way out on the end of that design. But I realize now that we're going to hold on the design in front of the Crow's Nest. But also access to that property. I mean, if these things are going to come up in the future, it would make sense to me to develop the rest of my property into parking for my building. Therefore, none of this is ever going to be an issue again. But I do need access to it, and the only access I have is that cross-hatched section there. So I just wanted to clarify that, and that it was traditionally always parking for the post office, and it has continued to be parking for my staff, and when we get all our new dumpsters for recycling, it's going to have to go in there. And, so all of those things. And of course, delivery really is an issue. I mean, we get a lot of deliveries, and not having to do them in the middle of the road is much better than having a place for them to unload. So thank you very much. Thank you for your consideration, and thank you for everybody's support in the room. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jan. Would anyone else like to speak? Or did she more or less speak for you all? Yes. State your name and address.
Ben Johnson, 1477 Victoria Road. My concern is the width of the corner. I'm a truck driver. We're the ones going by that corner all day long. And putting the sidewalk out on that corner, it's already almost an impossible corner to take. You're in the other lane, and you got to take the whole road to negotiate that corner now. I don't understand how we're going to put people in a sidewalk on the inside of the tires. With a cement wall there. It's a very unsafe. I can't even imagine. I don't know, but that's what I see in the plan.
Mr. Gregg, would you like to respond to that?
Through the acting mayor. So the turning template for the semi-trailers moving fish from the fish plant
yes.
up towards Matterson that's been one of the primary tasks of the transportation engineers is to run that vehicle through there. So the radius of that wall is being designed by the engineers to accommodate that.
They're changing the wall.
Changing the wall. The existing wall that's there is removed, and there's a new wall. It's basically essentially being adjusted as part of this design. The alignment of essentially the movement along Cedar Road, heading, if you imagine from the UHS plant, heading along Cedar Road and through across Main Street, aligning that so that currently the lanes are offset. And so there's a bit of a jog that happens in that big intersection that they are working to align those so it's more of a straight shot and as regular as possible, given the angles of what's there.
One of the other issues is you talked about parking up on Helen, making the corner off of Helen off of Fraser Lane onto Helen, the left, putting any parking on the other side of the road restricts any turning out of that intersection.
Through the acting mayor. The plan is not to put parking going up Helen on what would be the water side.
The opposite side.
Yeah, towards Frankie's. That there isn't as part of this project any parking extending up that direction.
But it's the other side that is the issue, because you're turning onto the other side.
Again, they're running those turning templates for a semi-trailer to run through those intersections. I should also clarify that the inside where we have some odd angled roads, both at Fraser and Helen, and where Fraser meets at the sort of the inside angle of the park at Main Street, that they're looking at the design, and there's some examples in Tofino now where the pavement is essentially flush, but there's a different texture. Smaller vehicles will turn around it, but there's bollards to keep the pedestrians sort of to earmark what is the safe zone if a truck is coming, so that if their rear wheels need to cut that corner, there's a safe way to do it to allow the turning movements.
We'll give someone else a chance. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak or ask a question? Yes, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Alex Marshall, and my address is 90 Thornton Road, Ucluelet, BC. Well, you know that part. Anyway, I was just wondering, I really appreciate the plans and all the thought that's gone into it. And I mean no disrespect when I say sometimes plans or certain areas of plans look amazing on paper, but in usability and real life, sometimes some ideas are just maybe not as we think. And when I look at your designs on the screen, I see also a lot of crosswalks, and I can only I fall back on that new crosswalk that was placed up in front of St. Aidan's, which is just opposite where the co-op is. And I know we're not talking about that area. But when I looked at your plans, you had a lot of crosswalks, and you also had, like kind of in front of Shipwreck Pizza, there was parking there, and then you had some pop-outs, like for landscaping or something to kind of pop it out and beautify it in a sense. But I think we've all, like past the Cisco trucks, stopped in front of there where we have to go around them to deal with the issue. And if there's sort of these pop-outs, which it looked like there was one sort of in front of sort of that Shipwreck Pizza area, it would mean that the Cisco trucks are being so long, and they would have to pass Helen, coming down the hill or wherever, and then you'd have to sort of pull in, and then there'd be this pop out, and it's just so dysfunctional to try to navigate around. And also the issue with the parking, the crosswalk at the opposite the old church there, is that when these fish trucks come through, or Cisco trucks come through the stop sign of Main Street, and Peninsula, and then they're already going, and then especially during tourist season, like tourists or kids or whatever, they see a crosswalk, they're taught that that's the safe zone to cross, and okay, this is where we're going. I've seen so many times where a fish truck has gone through that stop sign at Main Street and Peninsula, at the top of the co-op there, and then somebody steps out across the crosswalk, and that fish truck is taking that whole, almost that whole span. But they must stop. It's a crosswalk, and that's where there's people are safely, taught to cross. And you had them all over your design. You had one in front of sort of that area where the liquor store is, going across where the new boardwalk is. You had, one kind of crossing at the corner of the edge of Jan's store there across and the fish trucks are just coming up the hill, man. You had another one going down if there's the new path leading down to the wall, where the promenade is, and there was another one there. So, and people are going to cross there. That's the safe place to go, and I just see it amazing on paper. But the idea that the Ministry of Transportation have issues with people pulling back into the intersection of Jan's store. But you can have these crosswalks that just create the potential for such chaos and accident. I'm just really confused, and I respect that your timeline is important because of the grant and everything. But I mean, this is big, man, and I think it would be a real shame. I went to one of these open houses in 2019, I think it was, and about this issue in Peninsula Road, making everything better, and it was lumped in with, I believe, the same meeting about the new bus system, and there were all the maps on the wall and everything. We were invited to look and that, but I was so flipping confused, sir. Am I the only one? I am so confused. And when I looked at the maps at this public hearing in 2019, man, I didn't have my magnifying glass with me. And I couldn't figure out any of it.
So Alex, do you have a specific question for Mr. Gregg?
I don't understand, because this grant has come through, which is amazing. And it's important to get it going. And if the grant defines working on this the spring of this year, I'm sorry, I just can't. I am so confused. I don't think I'm the only person that's confused, and I respect the timeline, and the grant is amazing, but I don't see, without a little bit more of a larger platform, that the citizens of this community can get together and really understand and have some ideas that might be important and useful and relevant. Starting this in the spring of this year, man, like, I'm so sorry. I'm just really confused. I don't have my only question is, how can this actually be working like this? I'm not getting it, and I'm just so sorry. Maybe I'm missing something, but I'm not understanding how this can get rubber stamped. Like, this is amazing. I think there's more issues than just the parking in front of the Crow's Nest. That is maybe a little hokey-dyna, when it comes to paper versus real life. And I appreciate all your effort and everyone's effort, but I'm just totally confused. And I think if this goes forward in the spring of this year, that I don't follow it. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Go for it. Name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Leslie John Kovacs Jr. I live at 2430 Pacific Rim Highway. I just have a simple question that if this gentleman here, who's the truck driver for the fish plant, is basically coming out and telling you that he cannot make that turn if there's parking on that side of the road, which is in that proposal, and you're saying to him in a rebuttal that the engineers have made it so it's safe with a degree of radius and all these weird numbers, you have a gentleman that drives the truck right in front of your face telling you that it cannot be done safely. How do you not listen to that, and how do you not take that into respect or into the context of what is going to be going on?
I think
He's
Mr.
right
Gregg
there.
already answered that question. It has been studied and proven that the radius is doable.
And through the chair, all of these comments we'll share with the design team. I'm not the landscape architect or the engineer on this, but that's something that we've asked them repeatedly to make sure the fish trucks can move through this area, because that is part of life in the vicinity of the Village Green and Ucluelet, absolutely. So that's their task. But the question's been raised again by someone who has perspective better than me. So absolutely, we'll be sharing that with our design team.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one last time. Anybody want to speak or have a question? No. Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you for your questions. I'm glad we had the opportunity to hear from you one last time, even though public input actually ended December 31st. But thank you for being here and expressing your opinions. And you don't have to stay till the end of the meeting if you don't want to.
Yeah. Everybody's leaving us? We're we are still live. Just so we know. We haven't recessed or anything. We're live.
We're just waiting for
I know.
everyone to leave, and we can resume our meeting. Okay, correspondence. 12.1, request for a proclamation from the district municipality of Ucluelet. I believe we made a motion at our last meeting to light up the junction sign in purple on that particular day, so this is somehow a repeat of that request, and we already agreed to do it. And speaking of which, today is February 22nd, and every year on February 22nd, Girl Guides celebrate World Thinking Day, a day of international friendship. It's an opportunity to speak out on issues that affect girls and young women, celebrate the founding of Girl Guides, and be connected to the 10 million members around the world who are part of the guiding movement. And we made a motion a few meetings ago to light up our junction sign in blue tonight. So I'm hoping that that is happening. Miss Fortune is nodding her head. Thank you, because I know the guides are going to be out there to admire it tonight. Thank you for doing that. 12.2, support for Bill C-216, a health-based approach to the Substance Use Act. Councillor Cole, would you like to speak to that one?
Actually, I didn't. I don't know enough about where I stand on the details behind this, so I would rather just accept it as information and not. But unless somebody else knew more and could speak to it.
Nobody else wants to speak to that one? Okay. Moving on, support 12.3, support for the legal challenge of the Government of Quebec, Bill 21. Accept it. 12.4, seeking your endorsement for Bill C 229 from New Westminster, I believe. Just accept that one. 12.5, Ucluelet Children's Center, letter of support request. Yes.
Okay, so I will recuse myself because they are requesting my boss's grant money. So,
Oh, the co-op has applied for this grant as well?
it's from
Oh,
the
it's
co-op.
from the
so,
co-op.
you know,
Got it.
I don't
Okay.
want there to be any gray.
Got it.
Turn your mic off, Jen.
Yeah, you make a motion. I'll second it.
I'll move to write a letter for the district staff to write a letter of support for the Ucluelet Children's Center.
If I could
for-
just interrupt for a
for-
sec. There's,
Oh, a written
Is there
one.
one right there? Whoop, whoop. Oh, look at that. I have one right there. Okay. I'll move that council direct staff to write a letter of support for the Ucluelet Children's Center to apply for the Co-op Community Spaces Grant for the playground redesign and pea gravel replacement as the landlords of the property being considered, as well as a partnership with municipal government who will accept funding and issue receipts on behalf of the Ucluelet Children's Center.
I'll second.
further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Uh, 12.6 is a variety of letters received regarding the Village Green. So we'll just accept those as a in bulk. Okay, information items. 13.1, Village of Chase support for BC wildfire petition. Anyone want any action on that one? 13.2, Care Network letters of support. This one is actually part of our budget process because the societies did all come before us at our last committee of the whole meeting. And the Care Network was represented there. So I think we'll just leave this as part of our budget process. $13.3, Better at Home 2022. I'm wondering if they would want to be a delegation to present this to us.
I've heard it. I think it would be good for everybody to hear.
I think it's a fabulous opportunity, and they are looking at having representatives on their committee, and I'd just like to hear more about it. So if we could have a motion to invite, I guess it's Pacific Rim Hospice that's actually managing this program, to come and be a delegation for us.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Excellent. 13.4, the new food bank building. This is an awkward one because I think they're a bit deflated from being turned down for the Community Capital Gaming Grant. But they are still wanting to work with us to come up with an option for to relocate the food bank on the Edge building. So I don't know that there's anything that needs to be done right now for this, unless anyone wants to suggest something.
No, I think we support and would love to see bigger and better things, and that we're committed to doing whatever we can moving forward.
And this is really part of our budget process too, I believe. Mr. Lawrence?
Thank you, Mayor. It would only be a part of the process if there was a actionable item attached with a dollar figure. So until such time as the food bank or comes to council with a request, then we would consider it as part of the budget. Or if council had a specific project that we would allocate funds to specifically, would we get into the budget process. So at this point in time, I don't believe there's any actionable items. And in future, if the food banks wants to come back to council with a request, then council would consider it at that point in time.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. 13.5 January checklisting. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Maybe all the people who were here might have had one.
Oh, you know, everybody left. Okay, 13.
I heard it in your brain.
13.6, the February resolution tracking. Anyone have any questions on this one? No. Okay. Mayor's announcements. My only announcement was that today is that guide thing, so that's kind of cool. Council committee reports. I guess I'm up. Well, why don't I go last? Councillor Kemps.
Okay. So 2 weeks ago, I attended the Tourism Master Plan meeting, which addresses obstacles and identifies the vision for tourism in our community, and we've been working with a group of stakeholders like the district, Wild Pacific Trail, Blackrock, Praz, Tourism Aquarium, and so forth. So I went to that. And also that same week was the MRDT renewal meeting with Tourism Vancouver Island came up and met with a whole bunch of stakeholders. So we just talked about tourism in our community, and because our MRDT, our municipal regional district tax, our renewal is coming up soon. So we just talked about some ways and maybe going to the 3% and so forth. So that was it.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Councillor Kemps? No? Okay, Councillor Hoare.
I also met with the MRDT Tourism Vancouver Island group and ended up having a really interesting conversation about birders, because I have a couple of bird-obsessed parents. So 2 of my 4 parents are bird-obsessed and travel the world. So apparently they're going to be a resource. Also on February 15th, we attended the Committee of the Whole meeting with everybody's grant and aid requests, which, yes, and Councillor Kemps was there too. It's always interesting to hear what projects are in the works and to wish that we had a much larger purse for them all. And that's it.
Any questions for Councillor Hoare? No, thank you. Councillor Cole.
Is this going back to the 26th of last month? Yeah, so I guess this never got... ACRD on the 26th, mostly surrounding the committees for the upcoming year and budget dates and everything that we've been going through. And lots of TUPs for nightly rentals and Area C and all of that. So I get my 2 cents worth about, even though I don't get a vote. I say the same thing every time. 27th was that the Health Network and Communities Building Youth Futures, possibly, and with the Tamarack Institute. So lots about the health of our youth here on the West Coast. So we had some local youth partake in the meeting and the dialogue, and there's going to be some follow-up in that. There was some hesitancy, and anyways, it was a very interesting meeting. The Coastal Family Resource Coalition, that's where you hear about lovely things like the Better at Home. So I'm really glad that Tarnia will get the opportunity to come and delegate. That'll be awesome. There was the Berkeley Community Forest, which I love those meetings. Lots of really interesting stuff at the table with those gentlemen. New bridges, some salvage projects, all kinds of neat upcoming things during interesting times with logging and the new practices and all the things that are going on with that. So, and then more ACRD in the hospital foundation, or the hospital, regional hospital district meeting. And I won't say any more about that. And then we also had a cow for the grants and aid there as well. So, and then I zoomed in when we had ours here. So, that's it. That's enough for now. Thank you.
You've been busy. Any questions for Councillor Cole?
Just
Councillor
a little
Hort?
one about the youth engagement thing that was going on. Is there going to be a report? Is there, it's always there's nothing to do comment from the youth that I hear. So I'm just curious if there's anything.
It was far
out of it.
different than a lot of the meetings I've been to where we're talking about what we think the youth want or what the feedback from the youth is, but to actually hear it from their mouths. And I'll forward you guys the meeting minutes and such, and then you can have a little read. And there will be follow-up. I believe Marcy DeWitt is going to have there's some follow-up to do on that as well, so I'll keep you posted if there's any upcoming opportunities and you had the opportunity to sit in and, yeah.
Great, thank you. I also attended the February 15th Committee of the Whole meeting. We had 18 societies report to us. It would be nice once we can do that in person again. It's just not the same on Zoom, but it was nice to hear from them anyway. February 10th, I also met with Denise and about the MRDT. That was a really interesting conversation. And January 29th, I was at the Vancouver Island Regional Library AGM, and I brought a few fun facts for you. We broke out into different rooms to participate in the development of their 2023-2027 strategic plan. They also elected their chair, vice chair, and executive committee for the year. And the highlights of the past year, 2020 saw a moderate revival in physical borrowing with a 2021 saw a 60% increase over 2020 of physical borrowing from the library. So people are feeling more comfortable about going into public spaces. Digital borrowing is going strong and remains 34% above pre-pandemic levels. So everyone's really caught on to the whole digital borrowing thing. Their website catalog and social media accounts saw 2.6 million visits last year, and 26,000 people attended programs that were put on last year, mainly virtually. Just some fun facts. Any questions for me?
No, I like your fun facts.
Okay, so we're back to question period. So this is, again, an opportunity for the public to ask questions. Speeches and representations about bylaws that were subject to a public hearing are not permitted. Are there any questions from the audience? Nope. Okay. Paula, are there any questions by Zoom or telephone?
There are no hands raised at this time.
And have we received any questions via emails to communityinput@ucluelet.ca?
There are no new emails.
Okay, we've had all the questions we need for one night. Perfect. Mr. Lawrence, are we going into a closed session with the mayor not here?
Sorry, this mic is touchy. That would be up to council consideration. We only have the one agenda item, so deferring that until a future meeting is definitely something we could consider.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so I move adjournment at 6:27.
I'll second it.
All in favor? Thank you, everyone. That was a very thorough meeting.